me. And as I've already said, I would just like to share for a few brief moments some of what the Bible has to say in regards to love and forgiveness. I guess the prevailing question which remains now, if I have within me the capacity to say just a few words about anything, I guess we shall see. A woman brought a parrot for a pet. All the parrot wanted to do was treat her bad. It insulted her, and every time she attempted to pick it up, it would bite her on the back of the arm. One day she picked it up, it continued with its barrage of insults and said, "You're ugly. I can't stand you." The woman had had about all that she could take. About the time she reached down, he pecked her on the back of the hand again. She grabbed him, went to the refrigerator, opened the top, and slammed the freezer door shut on the parrot. She heard the parrot making a little bit of noise for about 5 seconds, and then it subsided. And then she gasped, "Oh my goodness, I have killed the parrot." She ran back to the refrigerator and opened the freezer. She picked it up. The parrot said, "I am very sorry. I apologize to you for all of my bad behavior. Promise you there will not be any more of that. From now on, I will be a model parrot, a perfect pet. I will be respectful and obedient." "Well, okay," she said, "your apology is accepted." Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" She said, "Yes, what would you like to know?" The parrot looked at the freezer and asked her, "What did that chicken in the freezer do to you?" He must have really thought that chicken done something really terrible, didn't he? Fortunately, the parrot got a second chance and was more than willing to try and do better. Aren't we all sometimes guilty of being like the above aforementioned parrot? Do we often fail to recognize the severity of our words, our deeds, and our mannerisms? Do we carry things just a tad too far? Are we just incapable of refraining from tacking on that last biting or debilitating, piercing remark? Do we always have to have the last word in any conversation and feel the necessity to always be right? Now, I know I'm not talking about anybody in here, but I just thought I'd throw that out there. How and why, you might be asking, would I be asking such a pointed question? Well, that is indeed a very simple question, because these are the issues with which I struggle on a daily basis. Perhaps one of you two may also fit that category. If that's not the case, I plead with you to be patient with me. At the very least, you probably know someone who fits in this description. We humans seem to all share one thing in common, that being we are mortal beings, making us somewhat less than perfect. Colossians 3:12 and 14, and the scripture that I got out of a translation that is a little different, I think, than what we're going to have, but we're going to be looking at the NIV version today. Colossians 3:12 through 14 speaks to how God would have us interact with others. "Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other as the Lord has forgiven you, so must you also forgive. And above all these things, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony." With that being said, we have to come to the realization that love and forgiveness has to be more than a token expression of remorse, a half-hearted attempt at reconciliation. People are smart. They know the difference between when we are sincere and honest and when we are only doing and saying what we may have been forced to or coerced into saying in order to save face, or in a last-ditch effort to make a sticky situation work out the way in which we would prefer that it did. I would venture to guess, if the truth be known, all of us know individuals whom we find it difficult to be in the presence of for any length of time. Pray tell be expected to treat in a cordial fashion and carry on a conversation based upon our genuine concern for their best interest and overall welfare. You know, it's not very hard to be nice to those whom we adore and who are always nice to us. It's easy to do kind things and to send affectionate words toward those who treat us in a similar fashion, or at the very least would reciprocate if the need arose. It's another thing altogether for us to be expected to meet rejection, animosity, and bitterness with Christian love and charity. Perhaps, if I am fortunate, I can maintain a good distance from such kind of people. And if I am downright lucky, we can coexist without a major incident or confrontation arising. But let's be real. Do you realistically expect me to meet that type of a person with both open arms and an open mind, to say nothing about a repentant heart? Surely you've got to be kidding me. As you well know, a person can only be asked to do so much. Maybe I could meet that person halfway if push come to shove. But is it reasonable that I be expected to make all of the effort? That I would be asked to make all of the concessions? Let's not forget the type of individual we're talking about. Those types of people certainly aren't angels. I don't mind assuming my portion of the responsibility and blame for a situation. But you just have to remember, these are not easy kind of people that I'm talking about dealing with. Am I expected not only to accept total responsibility for such a situation, but at the same time humbly come bearing an olive branch, asking their forgiveness? Is this really what God would have me to do? What does His Word say about such conflict? Luke speaks to a personal relationships from a rather candid and direct point of view. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get the same amount in return. But love your enemies and do good and lend expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for He is kind to the ungrateful and to the evil. And be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. This kind of puts a different twist on what is expected out of us as believers, doesn't it? Am I to understand that I am to react to bad with goodness and to bitterness with love and acceptance? Does this mean putting the past in the past and being willing to not only forgive, but to forget as well? Certainly seems like this is a lot of giving that it's asking on my part. Yet when we stop and really think about who has given what, our sacrifices pale in comparison to the sacrifice Jesus Christ made on our behalf. He gladly went to the cross of Calvary in order to pay a debt of sin for all of humanity. He not only did He pay a debt He did not owe, He paid a debt mankind could not pay. Anything we might already have faced in the past or might possibly be facing in the future seems trite and somewhat insignificant compared to the persecution, the ridicule, and the ultimate death that Jesus received. Romans, the 5th chapter, the 8th verse, reflects on this series of events very simply by saying, "But God shows His love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." We can continue on to that most beloved and well-known verse, John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish but have eternal life." I scarcely doubt as I reflect upon it that any of us will ever have to face the same scrutiny that Jesus faced or be asked to make the same ultimate sacrifice that he willingly made. Yet, at the risk of being negligent, remember what God's holy word says in John 15th chapter, the 13th verse. Greater love have no one than this, that someone lay down his life for one of his friends. Where does this leave us at in present-day America? As we stop and think, do you think our busy-paced, self-centered, career-driven lives are overly pleasing in the sight of God? Sometimes I'm afraid that we get so caught up in our own lives, our own immediate family, and our own inner circle of friends that inadvertently we become oblivious to the needs of others. I am not trying to suggest that God doesn't want us to do well in our jobs, to be fed, clothed, and housed comfortably, and experience joy and pleasure in our lives. But I do think that He wants us to be keenly aware of the plight of the less fortunate among us and sensitive to their needs. We're charged with taking care of and looking out for our families, but genuine care and love must extend beyond our own driveway, encompass a circle larger than our own family, and quite possibly force us to reconsider just who our neighbor is. If you're like most of us, it is very likely that some of you don't know who your next door neighbor is. I don't think that this is as much a product of our being insensitive and a lack of care as much as is a reflection of the world in which we now live. We live at a very hectic pace these days and often still find that our days are not long enough to fit our agenda. Do you think that we might be better served spending more time in prayer, seeking God's will? I feel confident that all too often, and here I'm certainly thinking about myself, we make choices in our lives, and then our prayer is that God's will coincides with the direction and the decisions which we have already made and put into action. I guess perhaps that it just be that I'm the only one that here today that may make these types of choices. You know, Matthew 5:44 and 47 sheds additional light on this matter. Therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. I might suggest that we would do well to take life one day at a time. In retrospect, maybe 1 hour at a time. On second thought, in reality, we are only guaranteed the very moment that we are now living in and nothing more. What does this say? Certainly this says that life is precious, not to be taken for granted, not to be wasted. Adaptation to change has and never will be an easy thing, whether it's a new job, a new home, or a new set of priorities. It has been said that it is hard to teach an old dog new tricks. I believe that concerns and cares for others has to begin within our heart as individuals. It has to become important to us individually. I found out a very long time ago that the things that I give priority to in my life, I will find the time to do. More honestly speaking, if the need arises, I will make the time for. Aren't we all somewhat like that? We can always justify our actions and our decisions because they're always based on logic and necessity. Yet, why is it that we all too often are not willing to expand our thought process when rendering judgment on the people that we interact with on a daily basis? I would assume that it refers back to that old adage, do as I say, not as I do. Luke 6:37 offers some great advice in how we should treat our fellow man. Judge not, and you will be not not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. I suspect each of us realize that in real life this is just a little bit easier said than done. This principle, though perfect and great instruction, is not always an easy one to adhere to and implement in our life on a daily basis. But you can rest assured of one thing, that people are watching you. They're watching me every day, particularly if we profess to be Christians. Yes, people are listening to what we are saying, but are much more affixed to our lifestyle and to our actions. It has been said that a picture paints 1,000 words, and yet we realize at the same time a word once spoken cannot be retrieved. A deed committed in haste cannot be undone. 1,000 acts of kindness quite possibly might be required to win one friend, and yet one unkind word or deed can destroy what took a lifetime to build. I can only speak for myself in the need to choose words very carefully. I know, personally speaking, I would be much better served to practice the art of becoming a better listener. Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter, in the 2nd portion of the 7th verse and in the 8th verse, reads that there is a time to keep silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter, and I think maybe verses 1 through 6, and then the 13th verse. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith so as to remove mountains, but I have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all that I have, and I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable, or resentful. And concluding in the 13th verse, so now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. Are we going to make poor choices, hasty remarks, and somewhat less than perfect decisions from time to time? Yes, most assuredly, you can bet on it. Why, you might be asking? That, my friends, is a very simple answer to this question. We are prone to mistakes because we are human beings, mortal flesh. Error in judgment first began in the Garden of Eden and will continue to exist as long as time reigns. Man was placed in a perfect utopia, but could not abide by one single law that God placed upon man. Humans, at the very best, have and will continue to always be somewhat less than perfect. I am reminded of the preacher who was late for his appointment and could not find a parking space with a coin meter. As to avoid missing his appointment, he kindly justified his action, as I stated earlier, that we sometimes have a tendency to do. He opted to park in a no parking zone and placed the following note under his windshield wiper blade. I circled the block 10 times and could not find a legal spot to park. If I don't park here, I will miss a very important appointment. He finished his note, forgive us our trespasses. When he returned, he found a citation on his car from a policeman with an attached note. I have circled this block for 10 years. If I do not give you a ticket, I will lose my job. Lead me not into temptation. Yes, this just goes to show how we are held accountable for our own actions. Did you hear about the Midwestern couple who were notorious tightwads, and they were getting on in age and had been married for many, many years? Bob and Sue. Bob desperately wanted to go up in a plane one time. He'd never been up. Barnstormers would come into town occasionally, and he just begged his wife at length, as to have the privilege one time of going up for one of those $10 flights, and she would always say, "Bob, you know it's too expensive. $10 is $10. Bob heard about a barnstorming pilot one day, and he was really getting on over there in age, who was in town, and persuaded Sue to go watch him fly. After all, he told her, it did not cost anything at all to watch the flight. Shortly after they arrived at the field, you might as well guess that Bob began to pester Sue about the two of them going up with the barnstorming pilot. It soon led into a full-fledged argument. The pilot, between flights, overheard and offered this solution: "I will take you up on a flight, and if neither of you say a single word, the flight is on me. It will not cost you a dime. But if you utter a single syllable, one sound, it will cost you $10. So off they flew. The pilot did as many rolls, loops, dives as he could make that plane do, heading toward the ground as fast as possible, just pulling up at the very last possible moment. But not a single word was spoken. Finally, admitting defeat, he returned to the landing field, somewhat bewildered and perplexed. He jumped out of the plane, he took off his helmet, and he hurriedly spoke to Bob. I am really surprised that nobody said a word during the entire flight. Bob interrupted the pilot and said, I almost said something when Sue fell out of the plane, but then I remembered $10 is $10. So, I suspect a lot of poor decisions have been made in haste, and we would have acted differently if given a second chance. Bob may not have saved Sue's life by speaking up, but I suspect it would have been the right thing to do, the timely thing to do, even if it would have cost him $10. But there again, I've always been taught that it's good to do what your wife says, so I guess he thought that's what he was doing. It has been said that time to open a door is when opportunity knocks. An opportunity in life can never be recalled or recaptured. When we feel strongly about something, then we should be compelled to act if it is spoken to us strongly enough. No, that doesn't always within itself assure success, but it does allow a window of opportunity for God's hand to enter into a situation. You may be asking this question: what can little old me do? To be sure, others have more time, more talent, and more resources than I do. Love and genuine concern for others can overcome a lot of limitations. You know, you can't always look at a person and know how that individual is doing or feeling on the inside. Sometimes something as simple as a smile, a handshake, a word of encouragement, or just a gentle pat on the back can make a huge difference in a person's day and how they feel about themselves and the world round about them. At the very worst, such acts of kindness require very little effort and does not cost you a cent. When we pass on these chances to reach out to God's children, we shut the window in God's face. Do we think about it like that when somebody asks us to do something? When we're presented an opportunity that we're just pulling the shutter shut, we're closing the window, we're slamming the door in God's face, thus not allowing us the opportunity to bless someone else through Him? Perhaps we may be afforded a similar opportunity to this same person, another chance. I remember one time I'd been over to Goldsboro to deliver some meat, and I had things I needed to do. It was one of those situations when I talked myself out of doing what I knew I needed to do, and I went by Kitty Askins, and I knew there was somebody there that was desperately sick, and I said, I will go to see them tonight after I get off work. They died within the hour that when I went by there that afternoon. I had the opportunity to have went when Terry Pilkington was up in Wake Med, I think, when he was really, really sick and bad off. I myself and someone else were thinking about going to see him on Friday night, but we decided to wait and go on Saturday night. He died on Saturday morning. Most of the time when God is telling you need to do something, then that is the time that we need to act. There's no time any better than the present to do what He's leading us to do. We certainly find the time, as I stated earlier, and I don't think any of us would argue that. We always find the time to do the things that we want to do. Where our heart is, where our treasures are, we will find the time to be involved, to put forth whatever amount of money, time, talent, and energy that it takes to make sure that it occurs. And I don't think any of you that are gathered here today would disagree with me on that. But when we fail to act in Christian love and charity, that particular chance is lost forever. You can't recall it. We can't go back and change the past. We can't undo events. We can't remake history. In closing, I would say this. It's true that we're not always going to agree with each other on every issue, and there's not a single thing wrong with that, my friends. But on this one thing I agree, and I believe that it is imperative that we find common ground. God alone is our Creator, our source of strength, our final judge, and our only true hope of eternal salvation. Jesus Christ is nothing less than the epitome of love. His love is boundless, insatiable, and endures forever. It can bring light to the bleakest of situations, encouragement among the darkest moment, hope to the desolate, strength to the weary, healing to the broken heart, and most importantly, salvation to the sinner. John 13:35 says, in a most simple and yet eloquent way, by this all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. And with the hands are straight up, I've got 2 or 3 little short verses that I would like to read that I read. I probably wrote these 40 years ago. Listen not to the words, because the words are very simple, and the meter and the rhyme probably even childlike, but just listen to what I'm trying to say with this. Kindness. Sow a seed of kindness, hope that someday it might sprout and grow into a friendship, because that's what life is all about. If you took away the sunlight, we would suffer temporary blindness. But the bleakest, darkest world I could imagine would be the world in which there is no kindness. A smile. Wear a smile upon your face each and every hour, for nothing in the universe can match its beauty or its power. As life fades into sunset and its evening rays draw nigh, a smile can brighten the darkest heart like a moonbeam illuminates the sky. And when life's play is over, its curtains drawn for shore, the smile you gladly sent to others will touch their lives forevermore. Sometimes the words not spoken are the ones we long to hear. Sometimes the path less traveled, 'tis the one that's most revered. It's not the deeds provided, though quite kind they are in need, but merely knowledge of deliverance, if ever should arise the need. No man-made tally is sufficient as to measure the worth of heartfelt cheer, and pales somewhat in comparison to the shedding of a single tear. And I'll read these 3 stanzas. Tell them now, in closing. If there is someone who has stirred your heart, but the words never seem to come out right, someone who has brushed away the clouds to flood your soul with sunshine bright, are you perhaps too busy building bookshelves to store the volumes that someday you will gladly share? But tomorrow is always a day away. Somehow life just doesn't seem quite fair. Has someone made your burden lighter, the hurt and pain been washed away? Take the time and say, I love you, while you have the chance today. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Let's rise and close with a word of prayer.